Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to our housing information session. We have an esteemed panel of experts to talk about various aspects of housing. My name is Edwin Hamada. I am the Assistant Vice President for the Residential Experience, and I will be facilitating this expert panel. With that, I will have my panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Kaylee, since I could see her the biggest right now.
Hi, you all. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk with you about some important housing information today. As Edwin said, my name is Kaylee. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am one of the 6 residential life coordinators here at Colorado College, and I supervise Matthias Hall and Arthur House. And some of my main responsibilities today are to talk a little bit about our pod initiative, some of our campus and specifically residential experience programming, and then some student life in the halls looking forward to spring.
Great. Maggie, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Maggie Santos. I'm normally the Director of Campus Safety, but this year I am the COVID Emergency Manager, so I will be answering questions related to COVID.
Yes, we have many of those. And last but not least, Makayla, who's visiting us by phone.
Hi, I'm Makayla. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the room assignment specialist here at CC in the student housing office. I help with first-year room assignments and most room assignments, but we help run all of the housing selection processes throughout the year.
All right, well, thank you with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with some information. We'll talk about who's been invited back to campus. We'll jump into some questions that will be grouped by topics, and at the very end, there's some general points that I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with. So I'll highlight some general points with that. So first of all, what I would like to do is talk about who has officially been welcomed back to campus for the spring semester. And a communication was sent back, I believe it was mid-March, and it articulated the groups as all students that were currently living on campus are able to remain on campus. Seniors who already have a housing assignment, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and maybe the challenges there of seeing that. First-year students that were sent home at the end of block 1, first-year and new transfer students who chose to take classes remotely this fall, new winter start students, new transfer students, new fall semester away students, and any NCAA student athletes not already on or near campus. On top of that group, the bridge students are also another group that also has been invited back to campus. So that nailed down a couple of different questions that popped up in terms of who's invited back. But I'm going to jump to Makayla and maybe ask her to talk a little bit about the timeline for folks that fall on that list that are coming back. How do they go about telling us what their preferences are? How do they confirm their housing spot? Can you go over that timeline really quickly?
Yeah, Evan. So the most important thing to do would be to log into Banner Student Housing. Every student has access to this. You can go in and look and see if you have a room assignment for this year. So for those seniors who have room assignments, they'll see their room assignments there. If you don't have a room assignment and you think you should as a senior, then you need to let us know. Everyone needs to go into the Banner preferences. So there are new questions that we've added recently about your spring plans. So we need every student to go in and let us know if they're approved for spring semester, if they need housing, or if they don't need housing. If they need housing, we want to know maybe who your pod living style situation, like who you would like to live with for your pod style living situation. We want to know if you have a preferred roommate. So if you want a double room, it's easiest to let us know who you want to live with. We try our best to honor requests for double rooms. And as you know, we're looking at our capacities for the spring semester. So we're trying to evaluate how many more students can fit in the big 3, how many more students can fit in small houses, and all of those room assignments for spring. So we need to know who needs housing by December 1st. If you don't let us know by December 1st, then you will lose out on the approval to come to campus and get your previous room assignment. The only way to come to campus after that point would be via the campus appeals. And your room assignments will be available in Banner by December 17th. And as we are able to confirm specific students who have room assignments, we will be confirming those in Banner. And so they might pop up here and there for those specific students, but for most first years, you won't see your room assignments until December 17th.
So Makayla, let me unmute myself. So Makayla, there's a question that was out there about if I'm currently living on campus and I'm going home for the winter break period, do I need to move all my stuff out? Can you articulate that a little bit about what that might look like for those students that are planning on returning into the same room?
Yeah, so for most students, if you're planning to stay for fall and stay for spring, we're going to keep you in the same room assignment. Unless, you've asked to be moved and we let you know prior to winter break that we're going to be changing your room assignment. We typically would require those people to move into their new space before they leave for the spring, before they leave and then come back for the spring. So you can leave your stuff in your room, but just know that just in case CC does plan to close, such as we did it back in March, you would be liable for shipping and storing your stuff if it were to remain on campus. So if you can take really important things with you, take everything that you need in case the college closes, and then, you have to make that decision for yourself. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you. Let's jump, because you talked a little bit about the room assignments. I know that there's some questions about community, what that might look like. And I'm going to step over to Kaylee. Can you talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about the pod system, first of all. And then what is a pod? It sounds good, but I don't understand what it is. What's the goal of it? How does it work? Things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pods are one of my favorite things to talk about because they are still in a lot of ways developing in a really exciting and new way. So we created our pod initiative in the beginning of the fall semester, towards the end of the summer, to allow students to be in groups of 6 to 8, not quite 10, but 6 to 8, so that students still have the opportunity to include their RA or to connect with their RA in their pod groups. The pod initiative is so much more than allowing students to gather just in these small groups, but it is a way for students to create a COVID resilient community in their hall. And so a pod being a group of those 6 to 8 students, they are grouped by proximity of room. So that as they're grouped by proximity of room, they can connect with each other, they can share or use a similar bathroom. They're in that close proximity to their RA, but pod groupings are not families in a way that you would define. 2 students that live in the same room would be considered in one family because they can be in their room with their masks off. They can be sleeping and do that comfortably. Whereas in your pod, you still want to be socially distanced, you still want to be wearing a mask, but you can do things like reserve a kitchen so that you can cook together. You can do things like coordinate with your RA to do a walk downtown together. There are still opportunities to gather and do it in a COVID safe way, but not in the same way you would do with kind of the family or roommate grouping. Other great things that we're doing with pods are pod programming. And so pod programming is a way for our RAs to create some community opportunities for students to gather in a COVID safe way. For example, we've had RAs that have done off-campus excursions together in a COVID safe way. We've had students and pod programming that has happened on campus, and we've done simple things like social distance movie nights, or I had an RA take a group to our art center and create pottery and bring that pottery back home, and create a space where they can still call, they can call their home, but do it in a way where they're engaging with other students and still creating an opportunity to engage. Because from the residential experience, we really do want to provide just that, an experience, and not a place where students are just living, but where they're still connecting, where they're still engaging, and where they're still feeling excited about their time here at CC.
Well, one question that sometimes pops up when we talk about the pod experience is, do I have to stick with my pod? What happens if I don't like my pod? Can I switch pods? Am I only forced to interact with my pod? Can you kind of articulate a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Students should, yes, be interacting with students outside of their pod. But I think the difference is being able to connect with students, like I said, in a way where they can gather still safely, socially distanced and wearing masks, but can do things that they might not be able to do with other groupings of, 8 or 10 students. So students, yes, are encouraged to still connect with other people in their building, to still connect with their RAs, to still do that, but to be mindful to do it in a COVID safe way. Because if a student was to say test positive for COVID, the first people that we would look to would be their roommate and then maybe the folks in their pod, because those are folks that are in their closest proximity. And so, yes, originally the pod initiative was to create this COVID resilient community and to allow students to be able to be COVID safe in a way that still says you can have a community, you can create close friendships. But we're still balancing how can we create these pods so that they are COVID safe and COVID resilient, but how can we also say that pods mean that you can connect with your diverse community and that you can engage with students inside of your pod and then think about how to be safe with engaging with students outside of your pod. So it's a little bit of everything.
All right, now that you mention, there was a question that talked about what the lockdown or the quarantine procedure. This person was talking about being in their room for 23 hours. Is it going to be this way? And obviously you have some experience with that. Can you talk about what your experience has been and what the student experience would be in case if an entire building were quarantined?
Yeah, absolutely. So as our role as residential life coordinators, we are live-in professionals. So most of us do live in the buildings that we supervise and support. And so me living in Matthias was a part of the 14-day large hall quarantine. And although it was of course, scary and difficult situation, I had the pleasure of working with campus safety very closely to support students in a way that made it a little bit less scary and a little bit less nerve-wracking. Students are not locked down in a way where they're not able to still do things that they will need to do to survive. And so I know that's kind of vague, but I'll say we were able to support through El Paso County Health outside time so that students were able to be outside for as long as they wanted, as long as they were doing it in a COVID safe way. And so students were able to go outside and do their homework or read, or at that time it was really warm, so they could sunbathe in their designated areas with their peers around them at a 12-foot distance. Students were also able to make laundry reservations, printing reservations, kitchen reservations, so that we can monitor who is in what space at what time in case we did find out that other students became positive. But we tried to create an opportunity for students to maintain their lifestyle, but in a way that was still keeping our community safe and keeping the building safe. Campus safety was also, like I said, really wonderful in collaborating with meal deliveries, meal intakes, and providing students any prescriptions or mail and other things that they may need at that time. And so we have supported, myself have supported one large hall quarantine with partnership, but we've supported, 3 large hall quarantines with partnership. And so at this point, I think we feel prepared and ready if that was to happen again, but have definitely learned from that experience, learn what students need, and are ready to serve them if it happens again.
Great. Thank you. The last question that I have was about sort of this feeling of isolation. There's been some concern from both parents and students that are currently living with us. It just feels like a ghost town. It's just isolated. Can you maybe talk about what you think spring might bring to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like I had mentioned or alluded to a little bit earlier, the POD initiative has its primary COVID risk mitigation processes and strategies to help support a COVID resilient community. But the other end of our pod initiative is to create safe programming and safe intentional conversations and opportunities for RAs to connect with their residents. So what that means is that RAs are hosting programs, whether that be virtual or in person, at least once a block. RAs are also having one-on-one conversations with students at least once a block, whether that also be virtual or in person. So students should always at some point during the block have an opportunity to say to their RA, hey, I'm feeling a little bit isolated. Can you tell me more about what's going on around campus? Or, hey, I'm really interested in getting involved in this club. Can you tell me about how I can do that? And so they really do have the opportunity to still engage with the campus community, at least through the residential experience. But the rest of the campus I know is doing so much to also work on engaging with students in a really intentional and impactful way.
Great. So jumping back to Makayla, there is a question that is asking about when can people move in? When can they get tested in order to move in? Can you review sort of that rolling move-in dates with us?
Yeah, so we have move-in dates for all of these approved students, people who meet those categories or who are approved via the campus appeals. So on January 2nd and 3rd is when we expect J Block in-person students and the RAs to move in. So January 10th and 11th, we're going to have the half block in-person and hybrid students move in. January 16th and 17th is when J Block Flex students are allowed to come to campus. January 19th is for international students in anticipation of ISO. January 25th is when Winter Start students can come for their orientation. And then for all other students who are approved to come back and will be arriving for Block 5, those dates are January 27th through the 30th. So those will be a little more staggered because that's when we expect the most students to arrive back to campus. And yeah, so they'll be taking their COVID test and they'll be checking into their rooms if they don't already have their keys.
And I know that during some of the multi-day move-in options, we're going to need to figure out some type of way to organize that. So I believe that we'll be sending out some type of sign-up sheet or assignment. So not everybody is moving in for Block 5, for example, not everybody's moving in on the 27th. We kind of space that out so they're able to test everybody with that. So that's a little bit of additional information that I had. Now that we know some of the moving dates, let me jump to Maggie. So Maggie, we've got some students that are coming in on this as early as the 2nd and as late as the 30th of January. So it's pretty much the entire month. Can you talk about what that looks like and what does it mean to be tested? What happens afterwards? And I have a follow-up to that if depending upon sort of where we go with that. But talk to me a little bit about what that looks like initially.
So all students, when they return after the holidays, will be required to take a COVID test. That test will be at a designated location, and when they come onto campus, they will take their test and they will go into an enhanced social distance status, which is not a quarantine, but it's kind of similar. What they'll do is they'll come in, they'll get their test, they go back to their room, they can leave to go to the bathroom, go get their food, return back to their room until they get their test results. At the point that they get their test results, then they can join the rest of the community as they normally would. However, even if it's negative, they need to continue to wear their masks, socially distance, make sure they wash their hands. One of the things they need to consider though is if they test positive, then we go into the level of isolating people, which sounds terrible, but what we normally will do if a person doesn't have an apartment by themselves, they will go into our Bijou West, which is our isolation quarantine location, and they will spend their 10 days there. At that location, we will provide them a person to talk to every day. They're provided their meals, laundry, if they need assistance getting library books or equipment, resources, all of that stuff will be provided to them.
I just wanted to add a little bit to your point, and I wanted to shed light on what the residential experience is also doing to make sure that as students are moving to Bijou West for their temporary isolation or quarantine, that they still should expect to hear from their RA for support. They should expect to hear from their RA and or any other campus partners about opportunities to still stay engaged virtually. And so it's not to say that any isolation or quarantine status means that you are disconnected from the community, but that you are still doing your part in the community to be COVID safe, but should expect to still hear from the same groups and individuals that are traditionally there to support students.
And one of the questions that also came up about coming back to campus is a quarantine period. There was an initial message at the beginning of the year saying that if you come onto campus, you had to quarantine for 14 days. That criteria is no longer part of our process. So when students are away for the holidays, you do not have to come back and quarantine. You just have to do the testing process and the enhanced social distancing.
And it sounds like as students access campus, they're also part of a random sampling process. So it's not just one test. Once you pass it, then you are good for the rest of the semester. You could be tested multiple times, depending upon how lucky you might be with that random sample of polling. So that's something that also adds to that. One thing, Maggie, I want you to talk a little bit about. I think we've often heard, we started out the year, there were 3 big building quarantines. Things must be just going, haywire over at Colorado College. What's going on? Can you talk a little bit about sort of how we have dealt with that, and maybe compare us to maybe some of your other colleagues that you might have experienced their experiences with COVID, and maybe kind of highlight how that's been.
So one of the things that happened, obviously, many of you know that at the beginning of the year, we had some full resident hall quarantines. Since then, we've been working very closely with the health department about our processes with contact tracing and mitigating the issue by isolating and quarantining students as soon as they're symptomatic. So that relationship with the health department has allowed us to remain open. We have not had any large quarantines, whereas some other larger colleges have had to quarantine entire residences or even their entire campus. So some of the students don't like to be quarantined and isolated. However, for us, if we can remove the COVID positive person from the general population, it has reduced our spread of the cases on campus. What I can tell you is a little bit about our process. So when a student is feeling symptomatic, they have possible COVID symptoms, they go and get tested, and then we place them into isolation pending the results of their test. And then those people, perhaps a roommate who lives with them, will also be quarantined until that test results gets back. If they get back a test that is negative and they have an alternative diagnosis, they would be released from isolation, and their contact will also be released from quarantine. If they test positive, that's when we do, like I just explained, we'll place them into Bijou West to the conclusion of their isolation and or their quarantine.
Yeah, Maggie, can you highlight some of the services that your campus safety provides? Because if they're quarantined, if they're isolated, there's a worry from parents that they're alone. They won't be able to eat. They won't be able to do laundry. They won't be getting mail. And so, can you talk a little bit about the services that your office provides?
Certainly. One of the things that we do is we do have a contact tracer that gets the original information, but then we have a well-being coach, for a no better name, that will contact them on a daily basis. So those students will be able to tell that person if they have any needs. And some of the needs that they might have is, we have students who are in classes. We had a student a couple weeks back who was doing a lab. We actually sent somebody to the lab, collected the items they needed to complete their class, and they did the lab within their room. But some of the things are laundry, food, and we have somebody at Bijou West, so some of the students don't want to eat what's provided, so they'll order Grubhub, which is okay. It comes to the front desk. The front desk person will take that food to the students in their room. There's obviously assistance with if they need new bedding, they want new towels, they want something, trash taken out. All of those things are provided, and they just have to communicate with what their needs are. And then we try to accommodate whatever those needs might be.
Thank you, Maggie. Are there other points that any of our panelists want to highlight in terms of services or areas that maybe we've missed before I kind of get to some of the general points that I wanted to articulate on?
Yeah, I think I have one. So one question that we've been getting is, are freshmen going to be able to live in apartments? So for room selection, you know, we do room selection for returning students throughout the year in anticipation of the next year. So for our seniors, we're trying to honor those room assignments to the best of our ability for those ones who have room assignments and are planning to come back in the spring. For our juniors and sophomores who may be eligible to come back, some of them may be assigned to apartments that they selected last year, or some small houses or language houses that they selected last year. So we're going to try our best to also honor those room assignments, just to keep it as fair as possible. You know, those people have been, you know, a lot of people are really excited to return to campus to get into their apartments because it's their first year of apartment eligible living. So this year has kind of been a little different. We have some first years who are kind of scattered across campus. But so as we're anticipating our spring capacities in all of these buildings, you know, we're evaluating where they might go. So we could have sophomores, juniors, freshmen in apartments. We could have freshmen in small houses, just depending on our capacity and where we can place people. And another thing is that we are using Bijou West also as it's going to be part housing and then part isolation spaces as well. So those are spaces that people could be placed at whenever they come back for spring. And I think Edwin may want to talk a little bit about Bijou West.
Yeah, that will be one of the points that I'll be talking about. The one thing I do want to sort of acknowledge is our assignments folks have a huge challenge in front of us. We have a lot of students that want to be back, and we would love to have as many students back as possible. And so for us, we're needing to be sure that everybody that is eligible to come back has an opportunity to tell us that. But on top of the difficulty of making assignments, we have students that are currently living with us, as we articulated, aren't going to be moving out to reset the entire sort of chessboard in that sense. So we are going to fill pockets of empty spaces with the appropriate number of students in order to be compliant to sort of our charge of being 50% in some locations. That's something that we want to be sure that we're trying to accomplish. And so it is a big challenge, and that's something that I definitely want to be sure that everyone acknowledges. Housing is not just fiddling their thumbs, just kind of waiting to make assignments. I mean, we've been working really hard to get that information out there. I'm glad that you brought up the point of supplemental housing. So along with our goal of trying to get as many people here as possible, some of our supplemental housing units are really good COVID safe places because there's more bathrooms per bedroom, and that helps us have a higher occupancy because there's less shared bathroom experiences of that. So Bijou West will be utilized the first 2 floors. I know we keep on talking about Bijou West being a place where isolation and quarantine happens. That is actually on the 3rd floor. So the first 2 floors will be residential communities. We'll have staff members there. Exactly what Kaylee was talking about, developing community, developing that sense of college pride, community pride, things like that. So that is part of our housing stock that we are including to try to maximize our numbers that we have. Another thing I really want to highlight is this year, we do not have, we've lifted the 3-year live-in requirement. For next year, they're re-implementing a 2-year residential live-in requirement. So for the 21-22 academic year, if you're a first-year student, you will still be bound by the 2-year residency rule. So that is something that's a little bit different that I wanted to reinforce because I think that's been communicated elsewhere. Another reminder that this will make Maggie's job a lot easier is once you arrive, our state, our county has been really hit hard. Obviously, the nation has been hit really hard with COVID, rising cases and things like that. So we want to be sure that once people are arriving on campus, they get tested, they do all the appropriate measures, that they're continuing to follow safe social distancing, wearing their mask, but their travel could be restricted. Like you may not be as free to roam about as the pre-COVID world. So kind of keep your ears open for what level we might be at. We'll be very communicative about where we are and where students need to potentially be restricted with that. Another point that I wanted to highlight is that spring break is now just a block break. So it's that shorter period of time. In the past, it was a 10-day spring break. As many colleges nationally are eliminating spring breaks, we thankfully have a block break. So it's a little mini spring break. It will give you an opportunity to sort of recharge your batteries, but will give you an opportunity to do that safely here in Colorado Springs. That is something that we feel, as Maggie articulated, things have gone very well here in Colorado College compared to other places, and so that's an additional shortening of a break that could potentially have been problematic with that. As we articulated in the past, once December 1st rolls around, there are some people that weren't on that original list that I talked about that were invited back, and so there were some questions about I have some in-person classes, could I come back? Those are questions that we will be addressing after December 1st. And so we have a campus appeals at coloradocollege.edu email address that will take on what those requests are, any exemptions that are made. They're the email that you will be emailing. But again, that number could be non-existent or a little bit larger, depending upon the number of students that we actually are housing and our availability of our housing stock. So those questions of, can I come back because I have an in-person class? Again, the only people that have been approved were the individuals that I mentioned in the beginning of this session. And then anybody else will be through the campus appeals process. So with that, unless anybody has any last minute things that they want to add, I thank you for your time. If you have any additional questions that you might have out there, very specific to housing, you can email housing@coloradocollege.edu, and we will have a staff member that will be more than happy to get to that. Sometimes we're a little busier, especially after these information sessions. So if your question does not get answered immediately, please be patient and wait a day or two, and then hopefully we'll get to it by then. So that is it. Thank you very much, and have a hopefully warm winter. Bye.